I've been thinking more about how to apply the concepts of time to mazes. In the space dimension, we have the standard measure, which is a ruler, which measures distance. And so in the space dimension, you can do various things to this ruler, like stretch it or shrink it or cut it. And in the time dimension, people often think about time as an arrow of time. So what are the equivalent changes to the arrow of time? If you take a ruler and shrink it in the space dimension, it's kind of like being able to go very fast or have super speed in the time dimension, like the superhero The Flash. If you stretch the ruler in the space dimension, it's kind of like making time take much longer, which is the case if you feel bored or stoned. If you knit two pieces of space together, it forms a portal or a wormhole. I've talked about this in my other videos. But in the time dimension, it's kind of like being in a coma and missing a bunch of time, or maybe being frozen, like in the Woody Allen movie Sleeper. If you're missing some time, maybe you were blacked out. Or if you're stuck in a time loop, maybe it's like the movie Groundhog's Day. In space, if we bend things, they get out of shape. This maybe is like taking mushrooms. And in space, if we jump from one point to another point, that can be thought of in the time dimension maybe like a time machine. So what would these concepts be like when applied to mazes? If you have super speed, you can run faster in the maze. If you're bored or stoned, maybe you wander around aimlessly in the maze. If you're in a coma, maybe you kind of wake up and someone has taken you further along in the maze. And if you black out, maybe you have a missing chunk of the maze that you didn't remember. If you're stuck in a time loop, maybe you have to go around the maze again. And if there's some kind of psychedelics under effect, maybe the walls are bending. Or if you can jump ahead or jump back in the maze, it's like a time machine. I especially want to explore these last two concepts. Let's say we take a maze and divide it in half and color half the cells green and half the cells red. There'll be some connection between the two cells that I have marked here in black. So what would the idea of psychedelics be, or bending of the walls? You could think about it as maybe that black segment moving from one place to another. If this was scaled up in a larger way, then the maze could get very interesting. What about the concept of nonlinear time in a maze? For example, if you were dropped at a random place as a starting point and you had to work towards the exit, but you were only given a short amount of time to make progress towards that exit, and then you jump to another place in the maze. This would make the time very nonlinear, and you would have a hard time keeping track of which parts you had covered and which parts you had not covered. I could imagine the gameplay being done in such a way that different places in the maze are only opened up to you once you are able to find your way from off the path to get onto the path to the solution. Here you can see after 7 turns, the maze is solved, but the order of solving the maze was starting with turn 7, then turn 2, and then turn 5. Turn 6 was only useful to unlock the position of turn 7. Mathematicians have invented an imaginary axis perpendicular to the real axis so that we can have imaginary numbers in a complex plane. This can also be done on the time axis. So what does imaginary time feel like, and how does it apply to mazes? The mazes I have been playing with already have 2, 3, or 4 spatial dimensions. So it's hard to think about adding an extra time dimension axis. An extra time axis could be added along an imaginary dimension or a second time axis entirely. Some physicists think that a 2-dimensional time approach is similar to extra spatial dimensions. In our universe, time marches forward, and so a second time axis would also march forward, but could possibly be run at a different rate with a different apparent speed or a different speed of light. I pretty much have no idea how to apply this to a maze, but I'll keep thinking about it. Any help here would be appreciated.